All right, what's up, guys? Really quick, I just want to thank the organizers and the other presenters. They're a great bunch of people, and this is an awesome conference, so thanks a lot. So first, a couple things about me. I'm a developer at Cyrus Innovation. We're a software consultancy in Soho. We do web and mobile apps with a focus on, you guessed it, RubyMotion and Ruby. Also a proud graduate of the Flatiron School. Right, they're a sponsor. They're just an amazing organization, turning people into programmers. And they changed my life, and they're changing a lot of other lives, and they're awesome, so check them out. Also, I'm the organizer of RubyBlind. We hold monthly meetups on Ruby and other programming languages, and co-organizer of the NYC RubyMotion meetup. Both of those are on meetup.com if you guys want to check us out. And if anybody wants to reach out to me personally, there's my Twitter, blog, GitHub, all that stuff, and I'll be around the rest of the day, so definitely reach out. So let's talk about RubyMotion, which is an awesome tool that lets you build iOS and, as of about a month ago, OS X apps with Ruby. A lot of you, probably most of you, have heard of RubyMotion, and some of you guys might have tried it. And you might be a little skeptical about sinking a bunch of time and energy into learning this pretty new tool chain as opposed to going the native route. Now, I was the same way. 4 months ago, I found out I was going to be on the mobile team at Cyrus, building apps with RubyMotion. I was super excited. Right? Really stoked. But at the same time, I was a little wary. I'd heard about things like Xcode and Interface Builder, and even the dreaded Objective-C, right? And there didn't seem to be any of that in RubyMotion, which I came to find was actually a selling point of the tool, for sure. But at the time, I was a little wary. I was thinking, what am I sacrificing by not learning these things? It didn't help matter when an older developer friend of mine said, hey, I don't know about this RubyMotion stuff. You've got to learn the Cocoa APIs anyway. So I don't see an advantage in adding another layer of abstraction. So was I wasting my time, right, is the question. Well, obviously, I forged ahead with RubyMotion. And now, less than 4 months later, my team at Cyrus and I have built and pushed FlavorPill's new iOS app to the App Store. It's pretty spiffy up there. We're also working with a startup in the UK on an awesome driving instructors app that should be in the App Store shortly. So what the heck happened? How did I go from not having done any mobile development and being pretty skeptical of using this tool chain to standing up here singing RubyMotion's praises to all of you people? Well, what I found out was sort of the central feature of RubyMotion is that it stakes a claim right in the middle of the Ruby and Cocoa world. And Cocoa are the Apple APIs, for anyone that doesn't know. On the one side, you're writing really expressive, just beautiful Ruby code, right? And on the other side, that code is getting compiled down as native and making direct calls to all the underlying Cocoa APIs. I think by blending the two worlds in this way, RubyMotion is really like a bridge from web to mobile development for Rubyists. Not one like this, that's pretty scary and intimidating, an Indiana Jones bridge, but one like this, that's a really solid way to get to where you want to go. In our case, building mobile apps. Now, this is important, because if you're telling your mom or your grandma about my talk later, which I know you're going to, and you forget my main points, just remember that a bridge forms an arc. And in that arc are 3 reasons RubyMotion is a great way to get into mobile development. The first one, abstraction in the right places, is mixing the speed of Ruby with the power of the Cocoa frameworks. There's also reading and translating, by which a RubyMotion developer sort of unwittingly learns some Objective-C, and that's a good thing, as we'll find out. And one I'm really excited to talk to you guys about, the RubyMotion community is just awesome and really mirrors its big brother, the Ruby Rails community, in a lot of ways. So let's jump in. I know I said it earlier, but I just want to repeat this for the record. When you're building RubyMotion apps, you are really building native apps, okay, just using Ruby instead of Objective-C. Now, part of the tool is a Ruby implementation that sits on top of an Objective-C runtime. That's the same runtime that native apps sit on top of. So all your object model is implemented using this runtime. So all your classes, your data structures, all that stuff, it looks like Ruby, but it's actually subclasses of their Objective-C counterparts. For example, a string in RubyMotion looks just like our familiar Ruby string, but it's actually a subclass of the Objective-C, much scarier looking and sounding NS mutable string class. So what does this mean? This means you can write idiomatic, beautiful Ruby like we all know and love. But under the hood, that code is getting compiled as native, and there's no conversion or interpretation going on, right? And no subsequent loss of performance, which is amazing. So on the other end of this cool abstraction are the Cocoa APIs, right, which are what we use to build out all the awesome interfaces and functionality of iOS apps. The RubyMotion developer is exposed to these APIs in their completeness. They're totally naked in RubyMotion, and you're making the same calls to those APIs that a native developer is. So something like launching your app and instantiating your top-level screen, which looks like this in native code, looks like that in RubyMotion, right? Really very similar and just a slightly different syntax. Now, I spoke to Laurent Sansonetti, who's the creator of RubyMotion, about this, and he said the following. And he's Belgian, but I won't kill you guys with my impersonation of his accent. But by design, we expose the entire same API as the one you'd get in Objective-C. The iOS SDK is mature and well documented, and it would have been a bad idea to restrict what you could do with RubyMotion, right? So what that means is straight from Laurent there, you're not sacrificing any CoCo functionality when you're building a RubyMotion app. Now, I think mixing the power of the CoCo frameworks with the speed and expressiveness of Ruby is a really powerful concoction. So we can build really highly functioning apps with RubyMotion, but you can build them very quickly and creatively using our beloved Ruby. So that's a little bit about how RubyMotion benefits the app, right? But it also benefits the app developer, I think. And that's through learning some Objective-C. So if any of you guys out there have tried to build iOS apps, you know this, right? All the documentation is in Objective-C, save for the lovingly translated RubyMotion docs. But anyway, almost all of it is in Objective-C. So when you go looking for help, you're going to see something like that. Or you're going to see some code that looks kind of gnarly and looks like that. And it's going to make you do that, right? And that's a natural reaction for a Rubyist looking at really verbose code. But after a while, from doing all this translating from unfamiliar Objective-C into our domain, Ruby, you start to learn a little bit of that language and some of the really cool things about it. And I think that's great for a couple of reasons. The first is totally practical. Since it sits on top of the native runtime, RubyMotion apps are completely compatible with pure Objective-C libraries. There's a ton of them out there, and really quickly you're going to want to use one for persistence or image caching or any number of things. When that happens, knowing Objective-C or some of it is going to be crucial in figuring out how to use that library. And it's ultimately going to let you use the widest set of tools available. Now, the second reason is there's a lot of, in Objective-C, there's a bunch of CS concepts that are largely abstracted away in Ruby. Things like pointers and typing and garbage collection and memory management, although we're all experts now after Mike Bernstein's talk, so this is null, really, this slide. But if you hadn't seen his talk yet, these things are largely abstracted away in Ruby, and we think that's a good thing. Most of the time it is, but when you're building a mobile app and you hit your first weak reference error, which I can tell you is a lot of fun, knowing a little bit about reference counting and memory management, that's really going to go a long way in helping you debug. And so by learning Objective-C through translating from our formal Ruby, it's a great way for a beginner, especially like me or any Rubyist, to be introduced to some of these concepts and build better performing apps. So where are we at so far? Solid understanding of the CoCo APIs because they're totally exposed. We can quickly implement our ideas using our beloved Ruby. Access to all Objective-C libraries, so functionality is sky's the limit as far as that's concerned. And we've learned some Objective-C so we can troubleshoot under the hood. We're building apps. And what's the first thing a Rubyist is going to do when you're in the mud building stuff? You're going to try to make it better and easier for yourself, right? And that brings me to the RubyMotion community, which is just awesome. Now, we spoke a little bit earlier about the very thin layer of abstraction on top of the CoCo APIs. That's a great thing, as I mentioned. But the flip side of that is there's a ridiculous amount of room to inject DSLs and wrappers and make those direct API calls a lot more Ruby-ish. I spoke to Laurent about this as well, and he said, I decided not to ship RubyMotion with a wrapper DSL mainly for two reasons. First, it's a hard task. Designing a good API takes time and energy, and there's a lot to cover. But second, Rubyists love to write DSL since Ruby's good at it, and I didn't want to steal the happiness. Right? He just wants us to be happy. That's it. And I think that's really great because it really does touch on what makes Rubyists happy. contributing and making things easier, more expressive, and better for the developers involved. So I'll just list off a bunch of the gems in RubyMotion that are doing this right now. Bubble Wrap is a great one that wraps HTTP requests, the alerts, the camera, very heavy duty, it's awesome. Teacup lets you write CSS-like style sheets to lay out your UI, which can turn into some very fussy code with the CoCo framework, so that's really great. SugarCube and SweetT throw some syntactic sugar on top of these libraries. Motion models like an active record port for RubyMotion, and ProMotion is getting a lot of attention right now. It's a cool application framework. I know that was really quick, but you can check these out and a bunch of other ones on RubyMotionWrappers.com if you're interested. There's also a cool example of Rubyists bringing some of their good hygiene and good manners over to the RubyMotion world, in that there's a lot of testing going on. Some of the frameworks being used are MacBacon, which is an RSpec port that ships with RubyMotion, MotionFrank, which lets you do Cucumber integration testing for iOS, And Motion Faken's a great mocking and stubbing library that I've been playing around with a lot. And there's plenty others, so check them out. The point is, this is what we do, right? Like as Laurent said, this is what makes us happy, contributing and writing frameworks and libraries. Because RubyMotion is such a small and sort of nascent community right now, there's such a huge amount of room to do things like this and really contribute and put your fingerprint on an ecosystem. And it's really one of my favorite things about the RubyMotion community. And I think you guys would be excited about it too. So definitely the community is something to check out. So where does this leave us now? That's it? OK. Well, where does it leave us now is I'm done. But you guys should definitely check it out. RubyMotion's awesome. And yeah, sorry I went over. But cool. Thanks, guys.